Cemetery. Isn't it sunnah to go to the cemetery? To remember those who have died? To make dua for them? It is sunnah. The modern godless world builds its cities in such a way that the cemetery is located far away. So you seldom ever go to the cemetery except when you have to bury somebody. But we would build our cemetery in the village somewhere contiguous with the residential area. So people, while walking to and from the masjid, can frequently visit the cemetery and remember death. Remember death. And so prepare for that day when instead of walking to the cemetery, we'll have to be carried to the cemetery. Schools. The village must eventually establish its own primary school. A number of villages can combine to establish a secondary school. Contrary to the existing Muslim school system in this country, the Muslim school in the village would not accept any state funding. And hence it would not be subject to any state control. Education would be based entirely on the system constructed by the village itself. There will be no division between secular education and religious education. So morning you go to school and evening you go maktab. No, we don't want to create people with dual personalities. Rather, all will combine in the school and be brought together as a harmonious whole, and we insist that the Quran must be the fountainhead, the foundation of all knowledge and all education. But this is Maulana Siddiq Nasir's work and the Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah Institute. But in addition to teaching in schools, children, and general education for people, villagers, we need to do something more. We need to produce our scholars, because Allah Himself speaks in the Quran about the ulama. And if He speaks about the ulama, you're going to pay a price if you do not struggle to create your learned scholars. And learned scholars don't have to be men as well, alone. Learned scholars can be both men as well as women. And so the villages combining together must ensure that an institution of higher Islamic learning, an institution of higher Islamic learning is established, like what Maulana Ansari established in Pakistan, the Alimia Institute of Islamic Studies, which produced Maulana Siddiq Nasir, Sheikh Ali Mustafa, who was here, Maulana Wafi Muhammad, myself and others. This would train our people so we can produce the scholars, the ulama, who will be able to teach and to guide our people in the generations to come. Agriculture. The village must produce its own food. Why? Because Surah Al-Kahf of the Quran has guided us to that. When the young man woke up after 300 years in the cave, if you've been sleeping for 300 years and you wake up, the first thing you feel is hungry. So they sent someone to buy some food. And they gave him instructions. فَلْيَنْظُرْ أَيُّهَا أَزْكَى طَعَامٍ. Go search for that food which is purest. Meaning that you're living in a world in which food is constantly corrupted and contaminated. It will be a wonderful experience for any of you to go with Maulana Siddiq Nasir when he goes to a grocery shop to buy groceries. You see him examining every label very carefully. Because food is increasingly corrupted. You're eating and you know it has some pork in it. because they've concealed it very carefully. And once the pork got inside there, the angel ain't gonna come to you. And so we produce our own food, and we consume what we produce. But we come back to that in a moment, inshallah. The cottage industries, an effort will be made to encourage beyond the agricultural base of the village. The agricultural base of the village is the base of the economy. But beyond that agricultural base, the village would encourage cottage industries. And so it will result in a diversified village economy. Particularly for those who are now working on minimum wage. Because if you're working on minimum wage, the chances are you're going to remain there forever and ever. But if you can get out of wage labor and produce your own goods in your cottage industries and sell, then Allah is the one who provides rizq, and you can get out of minimum wage. The religious structure of the village. All Muslim residents in the village would constitute one Jamaat. At the back of the hall you find my book, One Jamaat, One Amir. And that book will spell out in detail the structure, the religious structure of the village. I'm just giving you a brief mention of it. All members of all people resident in the village, all Muslims resident in the village would constitute one Jamaat. That Jamaat will have one Amir. All members of the Jamaat would have to give a pledge to obey the Amir, so that we can have discipline in this village. Any villager who is unwilling to obey the Amir, despite our efforts to convince him to do so, will have to leave the village. And so the lawyers are going to have to work out a legal system that will make it possible for us to remove him from the village. The Amir, in turn, would have an obligation to establish Islam in the Jamaat. It is not sufficient for us to be preaching Islam. Lecture after lecture after lecture after lecture. Man, we're tired hearing you, man. Why don't you establish the thing? You're talking. Why don't you establish it? And so the Emir will have an obligation to establish Islam in the village. When you establish Islam, then your da'wah now has a second part. You can say, come brother, come sister, come see Islam. Come and see Islam. It will be a living force, and the truth will attract people to it. You don't have to do it. The truth itself will attract the hearts of people. What about disputes in the village? Disputes you shall now solve with Kaplas. The village of old in Trinidad, the village of old regulated its disputes through a village panchayat, isn't it? So why do you want to come to attack us now if we want to bring back the panchayat? It's only Lloyd Best who could do it and we can't do it. This is a village court, and it works only to the extent that villages respect it and villages are willing to submit to its decisions. Our panchayat will be headed by in Trinidad they call it Qazi. The correct pronunciation is Qadi. And Haji Ruknuddin Rahimahullah was Qazi, wasn't he? That is the village judge. So the village panchayat will be headed by a village Qazi or Qadi, who would decide all disputes in accordance with the Sharia. Our goal in establishing the panchayat, in establishing the economic system of the village, in establishing the political structure of the village, our goal is to so establish justice in the village that we eventually succeed in achieving a virtually crime-free village, which would be the envy of the rest of the country. In addition to this brief description of the layout, the structure, the functions of the village, let us go on to speak in a little bit more detail about the benefits of establishing Muslim villages. Anybody you know who was kidnapped recently?